Fabricadabra at LPL presents Carefree Culottes. Culottes are a type of women's pants that they end at the knee or below the knee but still above the ankle. The pants are flared out from the hip and they resemble a skirt, which is why its other name is also the split skirt. I found a free PDF pattern on the Tiana's Closet website for culottes with an elastic waist made of jersey fabric. Unfortunately, about halfway through the project, I realized that the instructions were not as thorough as I would have liked. So I included QR codes below to other projects and patterns. Let's begin. First, these are the materials we're going to need. We're going to need the pattern or instructions to follow. We're also going to need fabric. Depending on your pattern that you're using, you might use a cotton, a jersey, rayon, linen, or some other type of fabric. Depending on the size, you will need between 1.5 and 3.5 yards of 60 to 72 inch wide fabric. For beginners, stick with a patternless fabric or fabric with a pattern that doesn't need to be matched up. We'll also need an elastic waistband. I suggest a 1.5 or 1 inch wide band. And any other materials recommended by your pattern, like for instance interfacing. And lastly, we'll need some thread. Here are some of the sewing tools that we'll need. You'll need a fabric pin or tailor's chalk for making marks. We also need sharp scissors or a rotary cutter, mat, and ruler. You'll need an iron, as well as pins and or clips to hold the fabric in place. And finally, we'll need a sewing machine or hand sewing needle. Now for a little prep work. First off, you will need to take your waist and hip measurements to determine what size pattern you need, or based on the instructions you have, how much you're going to need to cut for your fabric. There's a QR code right here that will bring you to a website that explains how to take your measurements. Also, you want to pay attention to the grain line of your fabric. The straight grain or wales or ribs in knits run parallel to the selvage, which are the ends of the fabric that don't unravel. You can look that up online as well. Patterns have markings for things like pocket placement. In the particular pattern I'm using, there's definitely pocket placement marks, so you'll need to transfer those from the pattern to your fabric when you're cutting out the pattern. Next, you're going to need to cut the pattern pieces. So you'll notice in my pictures I have 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces. Each front and back piece is going to make 1 leg of the pant. And you'll notice that the front pieces, you're going to want to mark these. I didn't mark mine and it caused me no end of trouble, but either with some chalk or something, just make sure that you know which ones are the front ones and which ones are the back ones throughout this whole project. And that's going to come in handy later and you'll see that. Also, you'll notice that I have the pocket pieces. I'm only showing 2 there because there's 2. There's one on top of another one for each of those. So there's actually 4 pocket pieces that you'll cut out. And then there's the waistband. And I made my waistband quite a bit longer than the waistband for the pattern that I have because I have a really big stomach. And so I was afraid of not having enough fabric for the waistband. So I ended up chopping off some of that. So I just made my waistband extra big, and you may want to do that as well. Now, my pattern asked that I used interfacing with this fabric, and I decided not to. But if you do use interfacing, if you're using any kind of a knit or stretchy type fabric, then you're going to want to use a stretchy type of interfacing. And most of the interfacing you'll want to get is fusible, so that means that you're going to iron it onto your waistband, and that way it sticks to the waistband. That's what fusible means. So now we're going to begin sewing by attaching some of the leg pieces together. So we're going to place a back piece with the right side up. The right side is the side where your pattern looks best. So in this fabric, it's really hard to tell on my pictures, but there actually is a wrong side and a right side. There's stripes on both sides, but the stripes on the wrong side look a little funky, whereas the stripes on the right side look really nice. And they have clean edges. Okay, so you want to place that back piece down with the right side facing up. And then you're going to place a front piece down on top of that with the right side facing down. So the two right sides will be coming together in the middle. You're going to pin along that inner straight seam, not the rounded part, which is it's going to be sort of the crotch area of the pants. So pin that together. And then you're going to sew straight down along where the pins are, using one of the zigzag stitches on your machine. I have several zigzag stitches on mine. You may just have one or two. And I went ahead and did a zigzag stitch that not only had the zigzag part, but also had a little bit of straight stitching with it. You can just use the regular zigzag stitch though, it's perfectly fine. And you want to make sure that you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to show you beginning my sewing my stitches. And I'm using the zigzag stitch and I'm taking my pins out as I go. And you'll notice because I'm doing this along a straight edge, I don't really have to stop sewing while I take my pins out. But if I were going any faster or if I was having to go around curves or anything like that, I would actually stop the machine while I take the pins out. Now that we've done both of the leg pieces, we're going to attach the crotch area. So what you want to do is sort of flatten out one pant leg, so one front and back duo, onto the other pant leg with the right sides together. And then you're going to pin that center U-shaped crotch area. So just make sure to use lots of pins when you're going on a curve like that. It's going to make sewing it a lot easier and keep things looking neater without a lot of puckering. And here is some footage of me sewing that crotch area. So I had actually already started on the edge, the straighter edge of the area, and now I'm heading towards the big curve. And in that curve is a big seam. And in fact, there's two seams together, so it actually makes it very thick. And so I'm showing you this so that you can see how I got past that really thick part because my machine wanted to stop, like it didn't want to feed the thick seams through. And so I had to do a little bit of zhuzhing to make that work. And you'll see here that I'm also stopping the machine periodically as the curve continues. You'll notice that my needle, when I stop, is inside the fabric down instead of up. And I do that so that I can raise the presser foot and then turn the fabric just a little bit without it moving. And then I lower the presser foot again and continue stitching. Okay, and I'm about to that area. This part goes a little bit slower. Keep it as slow as you'd like because going around curves is always a little bit tricky, especially if you want to keep your seam fairly straight or fairly on track. And so now you can see I'm kind of just barely pushing and lifting the presser foot up, and then I'll push a little bit of the fabric underneath. And then now at this part, I'm going to sort of pull and push the bulk of the fabric underneath the presser foot so that I can get to the other side where it's much thinner and easier to work. And so to continue with attaching the crotch, we're going to sew that crotch area. So we've pinned it, and now we're going to sew it using a zigzag stitch again, and again a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to move on to attaching the pockets to the pant legs. And so you want to align each of the 4 pocket pieces. So take one pocket piece, and you're going to take the flat edge of that pocket piece and align it with the outer edge of one of the 4 leg pieces. Okay, that's where the pattern markings are going to come in handy, because you're going to use those pattern markings on the pocket as well as the pattern markings on the pant leg to match those up. That way your pockets match up when we're going to finish sewing this all together. And then you want to pin those pocket pieces in place so that we can sew them in the next step, where we're going to sew that the straight pinned edges using again another zigzag stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you want to do the same for each of the 4 pocket and leg pieces. Okay, so here's kind of a fun part. This is a very weird looking picture. What I've done is I have opened up the entire large piece and lay it flat on your work surface, okay? And you can lay it with wrong side facing up or the right side facing down towards your work surface. And you'll see here in this picture that I've labeled them with F's and V's, and that tells me where the front pieces are and where the back pieces of the legs are. Okay, and so in the next picture, you're going to fold the 2 front pieces to the 2 back pieces. Okay, so I've kind of turned my camera angle on this one. So we're looking at it from the straight edges, and now we're looking at it from the 2 sides with the sort of crotch area there. We're going to take the front pieces, move it up to put on the back pieces, and when you're moving it up, you're going to kind of curve out those inner places where you see the little triangles. You're going to kind of curve that out, and it's basically going to turn into your waist. And then the rest of that will be the leg with the crotch underneath, and you'll see that in the next picture. So now you have the culottes in the correct placement, and you'll notice that the pockets are coming out. The pockets are coming out on the sides, and we're just seeing the front pieces that have been laid on top of the back pieces. And you'll see at the top there's the waist. Okay, so next we're going to finish up these pant legs. We want to align the outside edge. So instead of the inner edge where the crotch was, we're going to line up the outside edge with the pockets on it, and the pocket pieces themselves on a front to those on the back. Yeah. So you want to pin, once you've lined those 2 up, you want to pin along the outside edges going around the rounded part of the pockets, but not along the straight edge between the pocket pieces and the pant legs. So you can see that here I've drawn a little purple line that shows you how we're going to be sewing that together. Now you can sew along the pinned edge, again using your zigzag stitch, and you want to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then do the same for the other side. Now what I did was I actually, instead of doing one long seam that goes around the pocket, what I did was I did a 1/2 inch seam for that little bit on the waist right before it hits the pocket. And then I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the pocket edge. And I did each of these separately. And then I go back in and I did another 1/2 inch seam allowance on the long part of that leg. So it's up to you whether you want to make that all one, basically one long stitch that goes around the pocket, or whether you want to break that up a little bit to make it a little bit easier on yourself. That's why I did that. Okay, so here's a warning. We're going to be attaching the waistband, and I did this part kind of wrong. So, and you'll see in a minute. What you're supposed to have actually done was, what I should have done was to basically turn my waistband, attach the 2 edges, long edges of the waistband to each other with the wrong side facing out. and then sewed that down, and then pulled it out from the inside, attach it to the waist on the pants, that top part of the pants. And so that way I'd be attaching my waistband to my pants, and I would leave a little gap in there, a little hole in the waistband itself around the ends, so that I could weave the elastic through, but I didn't do that. So that's a lot of explanation for me to tell you that I did it wrong. So and now I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it, and you can do it this way. It's actually easier to do it this way, and that's why I did it. But then when I got to the end of it, I was like, oops, I kind of messed up. So anyway, you'll see what I mean. What I did instead was that I aligned one long edge of the waistband to the top edge of the waist area with the right sides touching each other. And then I pinned that into place. So you may want to, okay, so now we're going to sew that into place using, of course, a zigzag stitch with for the waist, I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance instead of a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And just to explain, the reason we use a zigzag stitch or that I'm using a zigzag stitch, is because I'm working with a stretch knit fabric. And those tend to pucker when you use the straight stitches. So you want to use that zigzag because it gives it that wiggle room it needs so it's not puckering the fabric. Now after you've done that stitching, you want to turn the culottes wrong side out again. So before you had them right side out, now you're going to put them wrong side out, and you're going to flip the other long edge of the waistband from the right side to the wrong side of the waist area. And you're going to align those two, make sure that you're covering up the previous stitching we did, and just enough, just a little bit. And then we're going to pin that into place. And then you're going to sew it into place using, again, a zigzag stitch and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now for the elastic that we're going to put in the waistband. So you need to decide how much elastic you're going to need. I used about 1 to 3 inches under the circumference of my waist. So whatever my waist measurement was, which I don't feel like saying because it's very large, I added another 1 to 3 inches to that. I mean, I took away 1 to 3 inches of that. So you want to test that out on your body to make sure that that's comfortable for you, and adjust it as needed before you make any cuts to the elastic. After that, you're going to put a large safety pin, or in my case, I didn't have a large safety pin, but I did have a large paper clip. And I pushed one end of it through one end of the elastic, and that's to get ready to insert the elastic into the waistband. Okay, so remember I talked about that big gaping hole I left in the waistband? Well, here it is. Normally it wouldn't be this giant hole. It would be a smaller hole, but enough to get your elastic through. So you find where the hole is. It should be aligned up in the back with the back seam of your pants. And you're going to shove the pinned edge or paper clipped edge of the elastic through one side of the hole, and then work it through the waistband all the way through to the other end, gathering your fabric where you need to. And then you're going to get to, you want to make sure that you leave a couple of inches at each end that is sticking out of the fabric, because we need to attach those two together. And so that's the next thing you do. You leave once you get the elastic through the waistband and you have, a couple of inches on each side, then you're going to overlap them and pin them together. Usually you just need like one pin. And then you're going to sew that using a straight stitch in a little box, just like it's showing in this picture here. And right here, you'll see that I've basically overlapped the two edges of the waistband fabric. And then I overlapped them with each other, and then I sewed the hole closed on both sides using a very tight zigzag stitch. And what I mean by tight is that with the zigzag stitch, you can adjust its height. So the height of the zigzags, it could be very short zigzags or very tall zigzags. And then you can also adjust the stitch width, which would be a very tightly bound together zigzag stitch, or it could be much looser. That's up to you. Okay, and so lastly, we're going to do the hemming. This part is actually fairly easy. All I did was I took the ends of my pants, where your hem usually is, and I rolled that up oh, maybe about 1/2 inch twice. And you can go higher if you want to. You can, you can have shorter pants or you can have longer pants. So if you want it longer, then don't roll it up twice. And if you want it shorter, then you may want to roll it up by inches and do that twice instead, or something to that effect. Once you have that pinned in place, then you can go in and sew that. And I actually used a really, really, really short zigzag stitch. It's actually a kind of a special stitch on my machine. It looks a little bit like a lightning bolt, and I used that to actually make this stitch. And Fabricadabra, here's our finished product. And here I am wearing my finished product. Thank you for watching and happy sewing!